I am going to call this voting meeting, the Thursday, July 16th, voting meeting of the Keystone Central Board of Directors to order. And we shall begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we will then have a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the Republic for which it stands, one nation, under God,
Invisible.
liberty and justice for all. Okay. Just as a matter of public record, an executive session was held on July 9th, 2020, for personal legal matters. And an executive session was held on July 14th, 2020, beginning at 8:10 p.m. and ending at 8:25 p.m. for personnel and legal matters. Mrs. Long, could we please have the roll?
Mrs. Donahue? Here. Mr. Alling? Mr. Johnston?
Here.
Mr. Koch?
Present.
Ms. Lynch?
Present.
Mr. Miller?
I'm here.
Mr. Probert?
Here.
Mrs. Smith?
Here.
And Mr. Strauss?
Here.
8 members present.
Okay, thank you. There are no presentations tonight scheduled. Are there any visitors who wish to address the board?
There are no visitors signed up to speak.
Okay, then we're going to go straight into the superintendent's report. Ms. Martin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I mentioned to Mr. Miller prior to the start of the meeting, but for all board members, last week I presented to you something called the FID program, which is Flexible Instructional Days. And what that involves is the ability for us to use a flexible instructional day, which for our case would look like a remote learning day in lieu of a snow day or any other school cancellation day. There's a tight turnaround time on the deadline for that flexible instructional day. And with all of the recent changes and fluidity of what's happening with even getting our phased reopening plan off the ground, I really feel that at this point we need to pump the brakes on the FID approval. May come back to you at another point in time with that, depending on if timelines and deadlines change, but we have only so much capacity. And right now our focus needs to be on getting schools reopened. So we'll continue as of now with the approved school calendar. Any snow days or cancellations would be tacked on to the end of the year, which is what everyone's used to. Also, many of you already know that late this afternoon, the Pennsylvania Department of Health and Education released updated health guidance for school leaders. All schools are required to have approved health and safety plans for the resumption of in-person instruction. KCSD will need to approve 2 separate plans. One is for K-12 instruction and one for our Career and Technical Center. The content of both of these plans is the same between the 2 plans because our CTC building is connected to the Central Mountain High School and the district administrative offices. We have updated both of the plans today based on recommendations that were provided to me from Dr. Elizabeth McGraw, who is the director of the Center for Infectious Disease Dynamics at Penn State University. The PSU Center for Infectious Disease Dynamics has more than 50 faculty experts in infectious disease. Dr. McGraw explained that the face shields that we had in our plan are not a safe alternative to masks, and thus I've removed the shield language from the plan. Shields are still available for staff and should be used in conjunctions with masks for the most effectiveness. The other recommendation she provided was to have students eat lunch in their classrooms. Our plan included breakfast for everyone in the classrooms, but we were going to still try to use our cafeterias at some capacity. She recommended against that. She said anytime you have large groups of students in the cafeteria, it really is just a recipe for spreading any type of germs or diseases at a larger rate. So while we may still use our cafeterias in some capacity, we would definitely follow social distance protocols and assigned seating. Our cafeteria sizes are very different from building to building across the district. So we are going to rely on our principals to make the best decisions possible for the size of their building and classrooms and coverage for lunches and so forth. In addition to the plans that you're going to see this evening and that you've already had a chance to look at, Mr. Kondo has also drafted some procedures and protocols that will accompany this plan. And while those procedures and protocols are not finalized, they're only in draft form, we're seeking input from a lot of other stakeholders on them. I expect that we would bring those procedures and protocols back to you in August for approval as an addendum to this plan. And if history repeats itself, there's probably going to be some changes put out between now and the beginning of August for us as well. So we could potentially revisit this plan before we open. But Mark, if you wouldn't mind, could you please share a bit more detail with the board regarding these documents?
Yes, thank you, Jackie. What we have essentially to go as appendices to this particular plan will be various plans dealing with a lot of different topics, from an overall facilities and operations plan to plans dealing with district offices and how we're going to operate under the pandemic and the guidelines that we have to operate under, as well as guidelines for staff, procedures and protocols for students, as well as food services plan, transportation plan, and of course any type of question and answer sessions for staff from HR. What we're looking at after meeting with Jackie this afternoon and talking with some other folks in the area, our next steps, what we're looking to do is, of course, we're going to involve the school board safety committee. They'll have an opportunity to review the documents, offer any insight, input. District administrators, of course, they will be the ones boots on the ground, so to speak, from a building level administration perspective. They'll have input as well. I believe we're going to do that on Monday. We also will involve all association leadership from across the district, from all of our various bargaining units. We have started that process already with the Teachers Association. Our support and secretary groups, as well as the administrative groups, will follow here shortly. We've also included, as Jackie mentioned, the individual from Penn State that we have utilized as a resource. We were fortunate to reach out to UPMC here at Lock Haven Hospital. Ron Reynolds was very kind in offering us assistance. So I will be meeting with Darla Hardy very soon, and she's also going to review our plans and help give us insight and input from a medical perspective, medical professionals perspective, to make sure that we're doing everything we can and doing our due diligence to make sure that our students and staff are safe. We also include school nurses in this process. And then once we have things more clearly defined, we will be hosting some virtual staff meetings where staff in the district will be able to log on and do some general question and answer sessions with administration. And of course, what I've been telling folks is that although we'd love to be able to say that we have everything in place and we know everything that we need to do and all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed, I think that we all know at this point in time, things are very fluid right now. There's still a lot of science being learned on the virus, and we are certainly trying to follow the science and all the guidelines that have been set forth, whether it's through the CDC, Pennsylvania Department of Health, and then of course, any local experts that we might be able to also tap into to utilize the resources there as well. So I think what we have now is at least a good shell of a comprehensive plan and program, so that when we move back into face-to-face instruction in the fall, that we will try to have, like I said, a good, safe environment for our students and our staff. Of course, I'm sure there's going to be lots of things that we don't know yet, and we're going to have to quickly figure out. So I've been telling staff that I've been approached by just try to be patient through this process as we, work through it and gather information and put it together in a workable document for folks to understand. So anyway, that's sort of where we're at right now. I look forward to getting input from the board as we move forward.
Thank you. Any questions at this time from the board, or the changes or things coming from the Department of Education or Department of Health? I know it's rapid, but just
Jackie,
anything.
I have a question. Randy,
Yeah.
hey, has PDE given any guidance yet on buses? Because I know with all of a sudden that 25-person limit now in enclosed spaces, does that apply to a bus? I mean, have they given any guidance? Because I mean, it's not fair to the district to sit out there and try to figure out what we're doing if PDE can't give us any kind of clue what they're expecting out of us.
Yeah, what there is guidance, and there's actually 17 bullet points regarding busing and transportation in the new guidance, and some of it's very similar to what was here in the past. I don't see anything new.
Nothing new? Good, okay.
Yeah, but one of the things I was actually pleased with the feedback that we got from Dr. McGraw. She thought overall our plan was really great, and in the grand scheme of things, she's just don't, because our language said face mask or face shields or masks, and it really is the scientifically the face shields aren't doing anything to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. But as far as transportation, one of the recommendations is encourage alternative modes of transportation for students who have other options, so that we can minimize the number of students on each bus. And I was going to mention this later in my report, but it seems appropriate now, is that a third of our families have currently responded to our parent choice form, and approximately half are planning to provide their own transportation, which helps us greatly. They do talk about the assigned seatings and absolutely requiring masks on the buses, keeping families together, things of that nature. I mean, keeping them, minimize the number of people on the bus at one time within reason and to the greatest extent possible. All of you know this, we are geographically the largest district in the Commonwealth, and there is no possible way that we can add 2 bus runs to accommodate what we currently do at one time. It's just not possible. Our bus companies can't do it. We have trouble having drivers now. It's just not possible. So what's feasible and what's possible for one district may be very different for another district. But I believe we're working very closely with Susquehanna Transit to make sure that the protocols are followed. I know some of the drivers have some concerns about, the masks and the wearing and enforcement on the buses, and rightfully so. Adults are at a higher risk for contracting COVID-19 than children are. So again, we're just all going to have to do our part. But yes, on the PDE release that I sent in an email, you can see the busing and transportation requirements.
Thank you.
I have a quick question with that then.
Yep.
With the mask being required on the bus, are we relying on the bus driver to ask the kids to keep them on? I mean, if they're not keeping their mask on, who's going to be taking care of that? The bus driver, or will there be an aide? How will that work?
We have not planned to put aides on the bus to monitor the mask wearing because we simply do not have the resources. We have 80 buses or over 80 buses plus vans that travel every morning and every afternoon. We do not have the capacity to add hourly staff. 80 people, first of all, we don't have that many people. And then to add 4 hours of time to their schedule daily for overtime and so forth, we just do not have the ability to do that. I believe that the bus driver's main responsibility is to drive the bus, keep the bus on the road, And we are going to have to rely on our students to help each other, and also the training that we provide to them for wearing masks. We're going to have to rely on our families to promote the mask wearing with their children on the buses. And we do have cameras on the buses, so I suppose if we see any misbehaviors, they could be addressed by the principal if necessary.
Okay.
Jackie, I have a quick question about, I was just curious, now that they're recommending that everybody all the students eat in the classroom, how is that going to affect coverage for supervision for each of these classrooms? Because I know that the teachers have to have their 30-minute lunch. So it would be the same thing as you don't have enough personnel to cover every classroom.
Well, our principals, particular elementary principals and middle school principals, have been working on lunch coverage schedules and staggered lunch times and so forth, and to which maybe one person is covering, monitoring the lunchtime, or two people with paraprofessionals supporting our teachers to cover those duties, while everyone gets the opportunity to have their 30-minute duty-free lunch as guaranteed in their contract. So I think we're working that out to not violate that, but also to try to keep students, students and staff safe whenever possible.
Okay.
I haven't seen the individual plans, Jeff, but I know they were working on them.
I assume,
Various
Sorry,
buildings.
Jeff. Oh, hi, Jeff. Go ahead, Jeff. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, that's fine. I assumed that they were working on something, but I thought since today that had somewhat changed, that it might create another problem for them as far as coverage. But
They were looking at minimizing the use of the cafeteria anyway, because if you recall, our plan really follows procedures and protocols that are necessary in the yellow, even in the green stage, green phase. So minimizing the use of the cafeteria is one of the big differences between green and yellow. You can use the cafeteria in green, but you cannot use it in yellow. So we might as well have a plan to figure that out beforehand instead of change things midstream.
right. Okay, thanks.
Hi, it's Elizabeth. Again, thank you everybody for doing so much, continually changing and updating. Not that at some point, would you just update us later if it appears that more parents are going to be driving their children to school, at least what we know right now, and 99% of our schools were built not with automobiles in mind, so at some point in the future, if there's a plan on how the traffic patterns are going to be helped along, so the cars aren't backed way up behind on the street or in the residential areas, whenever that plan is put together, we'd all be really curious to hear how we can keep that traffic flowing maybe a little better than what I'm afraid it might end up being.
So those plans are already being developed. I have talked a little bit, but not recently, with the middle school crew from Central Mountain Middle School. I did speak yesterday with Mr. Borelli and Mrs. Klein regarding the drop-off areas at the high school and how many different entrances. We're trying to use a variety of different entrances so that students can come in single file, get the health checks on the way through the door, and head directly to their classroom with minimal interaction with anyone. And we do have staggered start times for particularly for 5th and 6th grade at the middle school, which I think is where most of the congestion happens that you may be referring to.
That and Rob, it's.
But the 5th and 6th grade staggered, the 5th and 6th having a different start time than 7 and 8 will also help alleviate any bus and parent drop-off traffic happening at one time. So that should help already. And then just organizing it so that we have staggered delivery times of even buses and so forth, so that we can kind of keep things moving in a fashion that isn't going to back things up.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Anything else? So I have just a few more things for you, and that is, as of this evening, 1/3 of our families have responded to the parent choice form, and as of now, half of those families do plan to use district transportation, and 75% who have responded so far plan to have their children return to school for instruction, either 71% face-to-face, and the other few percent are choosing to come to school but be in the hybrid model where they have additional safety precautions that are more guaranteed. Again, the plans call for 6 feet apart when feasible, and we will do that to the maximum extent possible, whenever possible. But there are times when we cannot guarantee that. So I just want to make sure the board is understanding that. It's not that we're saying we won't, we will whenever we can, but we cannot guarantee it outside that hybrid option 100% of the time. It is necessary for parents to inform us of their choice so we can effectively prepare for phased reopening. Our duty schedules, our staff schedules, our teaching schedules, even though they're developed, they are going to have to adjust to accommodate the parent choices. So we do have asked our parents to let us know of their choice by July 30th. If they've changed their choices, they need to go back in and submit, do the survey again. We will be able to track their most recent choice in the form. And, I know that we're all well aware of the challenges that this pandemic has placed on schools across the world. And we are really in desperate need of everyone's help to follow the guidelines to the best of their ability. In order for us to open in the fall and stay open, everyone has to do their part. And I truly believe that we can do this if we work together and everybody continues to be patient and understanding. We will do our best to answer your questions. We will do the best we can just to make everybody feel less anxiety about coming back to school. And I hope every day that our scientists are helping to solve this problem so that we can get back to some normal face-to-face instruction, which we all know is best for most of the kids most of the time. So hopefully we can get there. And I also just want to say I'm super proud of my staff, the directors, the administrators. Everyone's been pitching in anything we've needed to be fluid and modify. They've been absolutely wonderful. So they're trying to take some vacation time, but I think almost every one of them have worked on their vacation days for different reasons. So hats off to the staff. I really feel that we have an epic team, and I'm grateful for them.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Martin. Any additional questions for the superintendent before we move on? Okay, we'll go to committee reports. So we had committee reports last week at the work session. Do any committee chairs have any updates since then?
No.
Okay. All right. We do have a few additions to our agenda for tonight. Under business, there are 3 items. One is to approve Glass Erectors Incorporated to install security windows and frosted window and door films, not to exceed $32,540, paid for by grant funding. We also have to approve the Gordian agreement for Central Mountain High School removal and replacement of sidewalks, not to exceed $208,342.23, paid by the 2020 bond issuance. That's almost $100,000 under budget. And also to approve the Peniston HVAC supply agreement for portable AC units at Liberty Curtain and Bucktail, not to exceed $56,700, paid for by PCCD grant funds. Those are the additions to our agenda that were not on the work session. Is there any discussion on any of those items before we consider it as part of the consent agenda?
I just had a quick question for the, and trust me, we all agree that having air conditioning in the classrooms is critical. And I'm so pleased that this has moved forward so quickly. Thank you. The portable units and that, those will, once the schools get regular installed air systems, these can all be resold. Is Is that what I'm understanding? It's a potential they could be resold when they're not being needed anymore?
Yeah, it's absolutely a potential. We talked about the possibility of keeping some on hand in the event that one of the other building system fails, or so forth. Having some on hand, but our goal would be to, move those products along when we don't need them. Mr. Miller, I mentioned it earlier, but before anyone moves the entire agenda, we would have to move it minus number 10 under the board.
Yep, I'm already aware of that, and I plan to pull that one.
I should have known you would.
Just for reference, we got to pull G6 and G7 too because it requires actual vote counts. So we'll get there. Well, with that in mind, I think Mrs. Smith, are you going to do the honors tonight?
I guess. So I'd like to make a motion to move the entire agenda with the exception of G6, G7, and G10.
Is there anything else anybody would like to hold? Okay, we have a motion to move the entire voting agenda with the exceptions of G6, G7, and G10. Is there a second?
I second.
I'll second.
Mr. Strauss, I think you got it by about 2 mil. Ms. Lynch. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote. Mrs. Long?
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Probert,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Strauss,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Johnston,
Yes.
Mr. Koch,
Yes.
and Ms. Lynch.
Yes.
8 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, thank you. First item held is item G6. That is the KCSD Return to School Plan. I will entertain a motion to approve that plan.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Mr. Probert,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Strauss,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Elling, Mr. Johnston,
Yes.
Mr. Koch,
Yes.
Ms. Lynch,
Yes.
and Mr. Miller.
Yes.
8 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay. And next is item G7. That is the Keystone Central School District Career and Technology Center Return to School Plan. I will entertain a motion to approve that one.
I'll make that motion too.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote.
Mrs. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Strauss,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Johnston,
Yes.
Mr. Koch,
Yes.
Ms. Lynch,
Yes. Yes, excuse me.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
and Mr. Probert.
Yes.
8 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, and our final remaining item is item G10, flexible instruction days. That is not ready. It's not fully cooked, and we don't want to consume something that's undercooked. So I will entertain a motion to table item G10.
I will make the motion to table item G10.
Thank you, Mr. Strauss. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Lynch. Because this is a procedural motion, there is no discussion. So we'll go for the vote to table.
Mr. Strauss,
Yes.
Mrs. Donahue,
Yes.
Mr. Johnston,
Yes.
Mr. Koch,
Yes.
Ms. Lynch,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Probert,
Yes.
Mrs. Smith.
Yes.
8 yes votes, motion carries.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that brings us to the end of our agenda. So if there's no further business to come before this board, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make
will-
a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Strauss has the motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston has the second. Does anybody really want to discuss adjourning?
So,
No, I have nothing else going on tonight. Yeah, maybe.
Well then, without objection, this board will stand adjourned.
Thank you.
have a good night, everyone.
Have a good night,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.